Imagine an aircraft that took its first flight before your parents were even born, a giant from the 1950s that was supposed to be obsolete decades ago. Yet, it is projected to fly until its 100th birthday, outlasting every single high-tech bomber designed to replace it. This is the B-52 Stratofortress, known to the world as the Buff, the big ugly fat fellow. It was built to deliver nuclear apocalypse to the Soviet Union. It rained fire over the jungles of Vietnam, and today, it is hunting modern threats with hypersonic missiles. Today, we are going inside the cockpit of the ultimate survivor to see why this 8-engine Titan is the most successful mechanical organism in military history, and why, after 70 years, the world is still terrified of the Buff's shadow. The origin of the B-52 began in a hotel room in Dayton, Ohio, in 1948. A team of Boeing engineers, told that their propeller design was dead, spent a single weekend sketching a radical new vision, a massive, swept-wing jet with 8 engines. The Pentagon needed a global striker that could fly from the United States, drop a nuclear payload on Moscow, and return without landing. It was a requirement born from the darkest days of the early Cold War, demanding a machine that could dominate the stratosphere at altitudes where enemy interceptors simply couldn't breathe. Engineering the B-52 was a masterpiece of overdesign. To carry enough fuel for a 10,000-mile mission, the wings had to be so long and flexible they could flex up to 22 feet during flight. To prevent the wings from scraping the ground during takeoff, engineers added outrigger wheels at the tips. But the real genius was the bicycle landing gear, which allowed the entire fuselage to rotate. This meant the B-52 could land in a crab position during high winds, touching down sideways on the runway, a maneuver that still looks like a controlled crash to this day. The silhouette of the B-52 is a symbol of absolute industrial power. It is powered by 4 twin pods housing 8 Pratt & Whitney engines, creating a combined thrust that can lift nearly 500,000 pounds into the air. When the final H models rolled off the assembly line in 1962, the Air Force thought they were buying a 10-year stopgap. They didn't realize they were investing in a mechanical Ship of Theseus, a plane so rugged and adaptable that it would eventually carry the grandfathers, fathers, and sons of the same pilot families. Inside the belly of the beast, the B-52 was originally a high-altitude nuclear fortress. A crew of 6, including a tail gunner, operated in a pressurized cabin filled with analog dials and heavy switches. These men were the silent guardians of the nuclear triad, flying 24-hour Chrome Dome missions where they orbited the Arctic Circle with live hydrogen bombs, waiting for a signal that would mean the end of civilization. This was the Buff's original mission, to be the most reliable insurance policy in human history. However, the 1960s changed everything. The rise of Soviet surface-to-air missiles, like the SA-2 that downed the U-2 spy plane, proved that flying high was no longer safe. The B-52 had to adapt or die. Engineers began reinforcing the airframe to handle the violent turbulence of low-level flight, allowing the giant bomber to hug the ground at 500 feet to sneak under enemy radar. This was the first proof of the B-52's greatest asset, its incredible willingness to be whatever the mission demanded, from a high-altitude sniper to a low-level brawler. The B-52's transition from a nuclear deterrent to a conventional monster happened in the humid skies over Vietnam. Operation Arc Light turned the Stratofortress into the hammer of God. Flying at 30,000 feet, the B-52s were invisible and silent to the troops on the ground. The first sign of their presence was the earth itself shaking as dozens of 750-pound bombs turned miles of jungle into a moonscape. For the North Vietnamese, it was a psychological trauma known as the steel rain, a force of nature that no tunnel or bunker could fully protect against. During the legendary Operation Linebacker II in 1972, the B-52 faced its most lethal environment. Over 11 days, the Big Uglies flew hundreds of sorties against the most heavily defended targets in North Vietnam. Despite the sky being filled with thousands of missiles, the B-52s broke the back of the enemy's industrial capacity. It was a brutal display of massed heavy bombing that proved the Buff could take hits, lose engines, and still deliver its payload with terrifying consistency. The secret to the B-52's survival in Vietnam was its electronic warfare suite. The aircraft was packed with jamming equipment that created a digital fog for enemy radar. The electronic warfare officer, or EWO, became the most important man on the plane, playing a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with Soviet-trained radar operators. This tradition of electronic dominance is why the B-52 remains relevant today. The airframe is old, but the digital shield inside is constantly being reborn with the latest classified technology. Fast forward to 1991, and the B-52 proved it wasn't a relic of the past. During Operation Desert Storm, B-52s flew some of the longest combat missions in history, taking off from Louisiana, flying across the globe to launch cruise missiles at Baghdad, and returning home 35 hours later. On the front lines, they were used for psychological warfare, dropping leaflets and then carpet-bombing Iraqi divisions. The mere sight of a B-52 on the horizon was often enough to prompt entire battalions to surrender, knowing the level of destruction that was about to follow. The Gulf War demonstrated that the B-52 had become the world's premier standoff platform. It didn't need to fly over the target anymore. It could release a swarm of GPS-guided cruise missiles from hundreds of miles away. This was the evolution that kept the buff in the game while the sleek B-1 and B-2 bombers struggled with maintenance costs. The B-52 was cheap, it was reliable, and it had a bomb bay that could be configured for almost any weapon in the American inventory. It was no longer just a bomber, it was a global mothership. The most shocking fact about the B-52 is that it is currently being prepared for another 30 years of service. Under the Commercial Engine Replacement Program, the Air Force is swapping the old, smoky engines for modern Rolls-Royce turbofans. This upgrade, combined with a new digital radar and a glass cockpit, will turn the B-52J into a 21st-century warrior. The Air Force realized that the B-52's airframe is so over-engineered that it has thousands of flight hours left in it. It is literally cheaper and more effective to modernize the old buff than to build a brand new non-stealth bomber. The human factor of the B-52 is what gives it its soul. There is a saying in the Air Force that the last B-52 pilot hasn't even been born yet. It is the only aircraft where a pilot can look at the tail number and realize their grandfather flew that exact same plane over the Pacific in the 60s. This creates a level of expertise and tribal knowledge among the maintainers and crews that no other platform can match. They know every rattle, every quirk, and every secret of the buff, making it the most well-understood weapon system in history. Another reason the B-52 is irreplaceable is its presence. In the world of diplomacy, a B-52 deployment is a message that cannot be ignored. When a flight of B-52s arrives in Europe or the Pacific, every radar in the region lights up. It is a visible, physical reminder of American reach. Unlike stealth bombers that hide, the B-52 is designed to be seen. It says, "I am here, I am loaded, and I am not leaving." This strategic signaling is a vital tool for preventing war before it even starts, a role that smaller, stealthier jets simply cannot fulfill. In the modern era of smart warfare, the B-52 has become a flying arsenal for the digital age. It can carry hypersonic weapons, missiles that fly at Mach 5 and can strike a target from 1,000 miles away in minutes. Because the B-52 is so large, it is the only platform that can carry multiple versions of these massive new weapons. It has transitioned from a carpet bomber to a long-range sniper, a shift that ensures the buff will be the first and last thing an enemy sees in a future conflict. The economics of the B-52 are its ultimate armor. It costs a fraction of the price to fly compared to the B-2 Spirit or the B-1B Lancer. It has the highest mission-capable rate of any bomber in the fleet. In a world of tightening budgets and complex maintenance, the B-52's simple, rugged design is a godsend. It is the Toyota Land Cruiser of the sky, not the prettiest, not the fastest, but it starts every time and it will get you through the desert when everything else breaks down. The final analysis of the B-52 is a story of ultimate industrial endurance. It proved that a great design doesn't have a shelf life. The B-52 established the blueprint for persistent air power, the idea that a bomber should be a flexible, upgradable platform rather than a one-time use tool. It has outlived the Cold War, outcompeted the supersonic era, and is now leading the way into the age of AI and hypersonics. It is the grandfather of the nuclear age, and its legend only grows with every decade. The legacy of the B-52 can be seen in the upcoming B-21 Raider. While the Raider will be the invisible ghost of the future, it will rely on the B-52 to be the heavy lifter. The two will work in tandem. The B-21 will kick down the door, and the B-52 will bring the hammer. The Buff taught the Air Force that you don't need stealth for every mission. Sometimes, you just need 70,000 pounds of explosives and the endurance to stay over the battlefield for a day. Today, the B-52 remains a cultural icon, appearing in countless movies and documentaries as the ultimate symbol of the hammer. But for the crews who fly it, it is a living, breathing partner. They call it the Beast, but they also call it home. It is a machine that rewards professionalism and punishes laziness, a cockpit where history is made every time the 8 throttles are pushed forward. The B-52 is a source of immense pride, representing the best of what an industrial democracy can build when it builds for the long haul. Standing next to a B-52 today, you feel its imposing, clean-lined, and massive presence. It is a machine that radiates a sense of absolute permanence. It doesn't look like a relic of 1952, it looks like a permanent law of nature. From the nuclear sentinel of the past to the hypersonic carrier of tomorrow, the B-52 has remained the ultimate tool of global security. It is the machine that ensures the distance between a threat and its destruction is zero, turning the 8-engine roar into a permanent guarantee of global stability. In the final analysis, the B-52 Stratofortress is the greatest success story in the history of aviation. It was built to prevent a war, and it has spent 70 years doing exactly that. It outlasted its rivals, outfought its enemies, and defined the meaning of strategic air power. The Buff remains the sovereign of the stratosphere, the immortal guardian, and the machine that wrote the history of the 20th century in the smoke of its engines. As it prepares for its 100th birthday, one thing is certain, the roar of the Buff is the sound of forever. The B-52 Stratofortress is more than a plane, it is a 60-year-old guarantee of peace through overwhelming strength. It proved that in the digital age, the most important armor is a rugged airframe and the ability to adapt to any threat. It is a masterpiece of fire, reliability, and absolute historical weight. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of the immortal Buff. Is the B-52 the greatest aircraft ever built, or is it time for the flying giant to finally retire? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe as we continue to explore the fire and steel of history. Peace out.